Hi, it's Ivy Slater, and welcome to today's Slater Success Live. Today, I am the honor and the pleasure to interview an amazing woman that I just recently got connected with. And it really is such a joy to have Mary Frances Winters with me today. Mary Frances is the president and CEO of the Winters Group, which is a 35-year-old organizational development and diversity and inclusion consulting firm with an emphasis on ethnic and multicultural issues. Mary Frances truly believes that diversity and inclusion work is her passion and her calling. Dubbed the thought leader in the field for the past 3 decades, she has impacted over hundreds of organizations and thousands of individuals in her thought-provoking message and her approach to diversity and inclusion. And today I'm going to be talking with Mary Frances on what brought her to this work 3 decades ago. It's a hot topic today, but it wasn't always. And then what is she seeing today and how is that changing? Also, the visions for tomorrow. What are we looking forward to? One of the things I really have gotten to know Mary Frances and have adored her about is her forward thinking, her true global outlook. So Mary Frances, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So it's interesting. I'm going to say 3 decades ago, we didn't think about diversity and inclusion. We were fighting for women in the workforce 3 decades ago. We kind of still are in a lot of ways. It wasn't a common word. It wasn't a common concept. What brought you to this path at that time?
Yeah, so in my world, it was being talked about. I know people who've been doing this work for 50 years. A colleague of mine who actually passed away several years ago, in his late 80s, Price Cobb, wrote a book called Black Rage, back in the 60s. And so we have really had this on our radar. I think that what happened last year with the murder of George Floyd, and I think it was just like the perfect storm, and we were in the middle of a pandemic, and I think that people were just more open to hearing and listening to the issues that perhaps they hadn't been in tune with before. But big companies like Sodexo and AT&T and Coca-Cola, I mean, these are all companies that have had diversity, equity, and inclusion for more than 35 years. So I think what's different today is that you have more groups who have been historically marginalized willing to come forward. So it's about gender, it's about race, it's about sexual orientation, it's about gender identity, it's about people with disabilities. And so there are just a number of different identities and intersectional identities, right? So we're looking at someone who might be an Asian identifying woman who's a millennial, right? And so generational issues come into play as well when we talk about diversity. So it's a complex issue, but organizations, really are about how do we create environments that work for everybody? How do we create environments where we leverage the diversity of thought that there is, where we leverage the contributions that different identity groups can make in the organization?
It is so true and so interesting. And listeners, those of you who are joining us live today or see this in passing, please feel free to weigh in, introduce yourself, leave a comment, and ask a question of Mary Frances or myself. For those of you who are watching this, missed it live, but are like, oh, wow, I have to weigh in on this conversation, please leave notes below because Mary Frances and I will continue to pop in. It's an important conversation. It's not a new conversation. That's what I love about Mary Frances and what she brings to the table, is she has decades of experience on bringing this conversation to light. And diversity and inclusion creates a stronger playing field. The more we include, the better as leaders we are, because we could see things from so many points of view.
Absolutely. I think that, as we think about the transitions that leadership styles have had, over the years, we go from the autocratic, days of, 50 years ago to, what I say goes, I'm the leader, I know it all, and you do what I say, to more of a participatory style, of leadership that says, I don't have all of the answers, and the answers are, resident in with my team. And so let me be inclusive of my team, and leverage the knowledge that they may have. And that knowledge may be because they're from a different generation, right? And so we hear, that baby boomers are, technology illiterate, and baby boomers, are out of touch. And we hear, well, millennials are slackers, and millennials, don't want to work hard because they want to prioritize, work-life balance. So it's not an either or. How do we look at the contributions that each, different generations can bring to the workplace, and not look at it as a negative, but an additive? How does the experience that someone like me, who's a baby boomer, brings to the table, but how does someone like someone who's a millennial also have a perspective? So most of my team, so my leadership staff, so most of my team, all of my team, actually, they're all millennials or Gen Zs, because yes, well, maybe no,
progressive.
What?
I love that.
I take that back. I do have one person who's also a baby boomer like me. He's new to his role, and I do have a couple of people who are probably Gen Xers. But for the most part, I have a young team, because in this work, it's changing very rapidly, and the attitudes and beliefs and the way people think about this work is changing. And so I want to make sure that I'm on the cutting edge. The other reason that I do this, as a baby boomer who will probably be exiting the workforce, probably in 5 years from now, I want to make sure that I'm developing those who will come after doing this work, and provide them the platform to have their voices amplified now.
I love that. And I love how you take responsibility for the development of our future. We're both hunkered down in beliefs in the work that you do, the work that I do, a little different, but we've worked in our fields for a long time. And it's taking the responsibility to saying this work is important. We want to make sure it is trained up, trained down, generationally.
Yes.
And I think that's so important, and something to be so well respected. And as leaders, nobody lives forever, and we want to live and enjoy our lives and leave a legacy that will continue to make an impact.
Exactly. And that is, exactly what, what I'm trying to do. We're living in such polarized times right now, where it's all about binaries, right? You're either this or you're that. And what we try to do is look at, the intersectionality. I'm not just one thing, right? I'm a mother. I identify as an African-American woman, heterosexual African-American woman. I identify, I already told you, as a baby boomer. And so all of those identities that I bring into the space, whatever space I'm in, they all matter, and they all influence and impact how I see the world. And our work is really about understanding how someone else could see the world so differently than I do, and how we can then forge partnerships and relationships that allow us to achieve whatever the goals of the organization. If we're talking about the workplace. However, diversity, equity, inclusion isn't neutral. It's not a neutral idea. So somebody said to me yesterday, a potential client said, well, we want to include everybody and include the perspectives of everybody. And no, not everybody. So people who want to do harm, or people who have a viewpoint that would target a particular group and say this whole group is bad, the stereotyping a group. No, that's not inclusion. So inclusion is really about saying, how do we create an environment where we understand our differences? We leverage those differences. We don't try to make everybody assimilate into a cookie cutter. And we are flexible around our own expertise and our own opinions, meaning that we're willing, as leaders, that we're willing to admit when we're wrong, and we're willing to change our minds when we have believed something, and we said,
Right.
That belief was good for that time period, but that belief doesn't work today, whatever that might be.
What is working today? What do you see when in the leadership work you do, the training you do in diversity and inclusion? What do you see that is working, that's changing organizations?
I think from a leadership perspective, it really is those leaders who are willing to be very vocal and firm about diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organizations. When they come out with statements that they stand behind that says, this is how we're going to be in this organization. So let's just take racism,
Yep.
because anti-racism has been more prevalent, as you were talking, earlier about this is diverse, equity, inclusion is new. I think what's newer is the willingness to have candid conversations about racial equity. Right? You mentioned that gender. We've talked about gender, but we haven't talked about racial equity. It's a difficult conversation. It's one that some deny. Obviously, we don't have racism anymore. We elected a Black president in 2008. Of course, we don't have racism anymore. So I think it's those leaders who acknowledge that we do still have the isms, whatever those isms might be. And racism is one of those isms. I wrote a book in 2016, long before, the pandemic, that was called We Can't Talk About That at Work, How to Talk About Race, Religion, Politics, and Other Polarizing Topics. Because, when I grew up in the era where you said, you don't bring on any of that stuff into the workplace, right? You come here to work and that's what you do. You just work. But what happens on the outside influences what's happening on the inside, as well. So I can't bring my best self to work if I'm worried about somebody in my family who might be profiled and arrested or, God forbid, killed. I can't bring my best self, to work. And so I think it's the recognition that what happens externally, that we're whole people, and we're saying we want our employees to bring their whole selves to work. If I'm going to bring my whole self to work, I bring all of who I am, all of my identity, all of the fears that I have, all of the stereotypes that I have, all the biases that I carry. I bring all of that with me. You're asking me to bring all of that with me today. And so I think we need to be careful when we ask people to bring their whole selves to work. I think we need to live by the values of the organization and make sure that we're living by those values. I think we need to listen more intently to those groups who have been historically marginalized. I think we need to understand the history of some of that, and so what the trauma and the burden that people might be carrying, and it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's in a different parallel, because this is what's going through my mind. It's like these conversations have been around forever. They might look differently as we've evolved, but the conversations have been around forever. So if back in the day, and I'm going to go back in the day, I might be a year or two, maybe younger than you, maybe. Okay, I'm just
I don't think so. You would be surprised. I don't think so. You're probably many years younger than me. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, then you look fabulous. I'm just shy of that baby boomer age. Okay. And, early in the workforce, when I was a young woman and I started raising a family and I was a working woman, to work with somebody in business, and I'm not even saying working as your boss, but any person in business, if they were not a parent, they didn't understand the multiple levels of responsibility I carried in my day, right? And that is, it's a simple example. And it's nothing wrong. Not everybody chooses in life to be a parent. And people choose it at different ages. They didn't have that understanding. It was just, and not rudely, they were not mean, or it was just beyond their concept of at 3:00, if my phone rang, I knew it was one of my kids checking in. They were going to their after school activity or whatever it was, that my instinct was, it's 3:00, I'm going to pick up that phone. It's just a different level. It's a different exposure and education.
Well, it's a different experience. And if you've never had that experience, let me tell you a story about just that. So I was working with an organization, and this man said, before I had children, he said, I would resent my coworkers, my male coworkers, who would say, I need to leave for something for, my children. So I would feel like, why are they getting this special time, to leave? And they're probably not working as hard as me. And he said, I would even, tease them and say, oh yeah, you're Mr. Mom now, or, something along those lines. He said, it wasn't until I had children of my own that I absolutely could empathize and could understand what was going on and why and how this was impacting my coworkers. And so there's something to be said for learning to empathize, perspective taking. If you're not in those shoes, I know we say empathizing is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but I don't think they may not fit, right? They may not be the right size. So maybe you can't do that. However, how can you take the perspective of the other by being more willing to listen and say, I wonder how I would feel if that was me. And so I think that's a great story about how, we don't know what someone else's experience is. And in the workplace, if we're able to say, Ivy has to take this call at 3:00 or she has to leave. Yep, I'm going to pick up this slack right now because I know she's going to do it for me, at some other point, because I've got something perhaps that's going to be important for me. So I think when leaders can create those kinds of environments in an organization, when they can create an environment that says, we're going to work with each other. We're going to, even if we don't really understand, we're going to assume positive intent, and we're going to assume that this is really important for someone else. I think that's the kind of environment or culture that organizations need to create, as opposed to, this sort of scarcity mentality, right? So if you get something, then I don't get something. We really do live in a world of abundance where we can all, give to each other. And that's really what, if we bring that spirit to the workplace, I think that we will have what I talk about, and that's inclusion.
Yeah. You know what, a phrase that you just said that just really hit me, really hit my heart, is positive intent. When we show up with positive intent. And I agree with you. We are living in an age of abundance, and we can choose to show up to live there, or we could choose not to. And so often the choices are ours. And when we choose to show up with abundance, we're showing up with abundance for all, because we see we're willing to include everything because it's an abundant world. We're not going to miss out on anything. There's a plethora, there's an abundance of things. And that positive intent expression really honestly hit my heart, because it's showing up, that's again giving us that choice to live positively and embrace it all. And there's so much to learn. I mean, one of the things I've said time and time again, when I'm done learning, I'm done.
You're done, right? Exactly.
I'm done.
Right, yeah.
I want to chime in, listeners. For those of you who are scrolling through live, feel free to leave a comment, ask Mary Frances a question, and touch base with us here on our LinkedIn live show, Slater Success Live. For those of you who are watching this on replay and catching, and I'm sure leaning into this conversation, please leave a comment. The biggest takeaway that today's conversation is leaving you with, and I always also talk about, don't just mark your takeaways, talk about the actions you're going to take moving forward from that experience.
Absolutely. When you talk about positive intent, I want to just add to that, but we also have to own our impact. So I think that if in fact our positive intent leaves someone feeling marginalized or left out, or that the comment was inappropriate or the action was inappropriate, I think we have to listen to that and not have the response, well, I didn't mean anything by it, or you're being too sensitive, because we don't know somebody else's pain. We don't know why that might have been triggering, for them. And so I think the idea of assuming positive intent, and then for each of us to own the impact that we might have had on someone.
Really well said. And I truly think very often, without malicious intent, things come out of our mouths. Okay. And it could be just a triggered response, a response from wherever. think about, I'll always say language and words have power. When something can come out of our mouths that we could say better, stop, take a breath, lean into it.
Yes. Yeah, in my book, I talk about pausing, pausing, right? We don't always have to have the conversation continue to go. Just pause, right? Stop. Yeah. I think that's so important.
So Tara's weighing in with a question, with remote and hybrid workforce model, and Mary Frances and I were just talking about this before we went live. Now here for the long term, well said, what can companies do to ensure their teams are connecting and learning and growing together and having a very important conversation? I think it's a great question, because as we are more remote and hybrid workforce, the diversity and inclusions were those in-person previous to this pandemic, guys. They were the in-person experiences. So what are we seeing moving forward for small and large companies on how to take this work forward for a remote and hybrid workforce?
So I think it makes it even more complex again. It's already been complex work, but I think being very intentional in recognizing, particularly, for example, during the pandemic, that if someone is working from home, if someone is caring for children or elder care in their home, if they're they've been asked to be teacher, right? They're the virtual schools, virtual learning, and I guess we're moving away from that, but still there's still some of that. So I think I think it is really recognizing that in this hybrid world, our work and our life have intersected. So you can no longer say, leave that stuff at home and just be. And so I think flexibility, we've talked for years about work-life flexibility. I think it has taken on a whole new meaning. And I think trust comes in. I think we have, as leaders, we have to trust that the people that we have hired and have entrusted to do the work will do it. It may not be done. It may not be done between 9 to 5, but it'll be done. I have one of my folks who does our financial. She does our bookkeeping and things like that and invoicing. She has 2 small children, and Crystal will sometimes at midnight. There'll be things that she's sending, at midnight. We've now asked her to delay, on Outlook. You can delay sending, so it doesn't look like we're making her work at midnight. But and then she's put in her signature, I'm sending this at a time that works for me. Nice. It doesn't mean that that's a time that works for you. And I respect that. So, so I think that, real flexibility and getting away from certain standards that, certainly I'm a baby boomer again. I keep saying that, but I know in the baby boomer, their butt's not in the seat and I can't see them. I don't know if they're working. So I think trust is really going to be extremely important in this hybrid environment, and allowing people to figure it out, and be supportive of helping people to figure it out. Being flexible. We have people on the West Coast, right? And I'm on the East Coast. And so I said to Kevin today, I said, Kevin, we got to stop having these 9:30 a.m. leadership team meetings, because it's 6:30 a.m. for him on the West Coast, right? So we need to figure that. We need to begin to figure those things out. Just being open to and intentional about, sensitive to, and thinking about, this works for me, but does this work for everybody on my team?
I think that's really well said, being open and sensitive to where everybody is coming from. And, Mary Frances just referenced that geographically, but there's more to that than just geographically. And I think that's the huge component about inclusion, and the huge component about diversity is we come from so many different places. Geographically, backgrounds, religions, sexual orientations, in so many fashions. And even for those of us who are in similar ones, there are still differences. So if we show up with everything with an openness, and I'll always, when I do communications work and trainings, I'm like, we think we hear with these. We think we hear with these. We hear with our hearts, with our guts. with our minds. We hear on so many different levels. So open all your listening skills and lean in to truly listen and be observant to others. I think, body language, when you see somebody, even in a good old fashioned Zoom or Teams meeting, lean back like that after a comment, be observant to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important. So yeah, new skills. Excuse me. We need new skills in this hybrid workplace. And we're all figuring it out. We're not perfect. And I think because we're not perfect and we're figuring it out, I think forgiveness is another attribute that I would, put in this conversation, to say, give people grace and space to not get it right. But create an psychologically safe environment where it's okay for somebody to say, I don't think you got that quite right, or this is how that made me feel, and be forgiving of that person. And that the person, the leader who's receiving that leader should, listen, take it in, and see what he, she, or they can do to change the situation, to adapt. Yeah.
And, viewers know we're all leaders. It's how we choose to lead. So, Mary Frances, how can the listeners of Slater Success Live learn more about you, follow you? You're a brilliant mind, a fabulous message, a beautiful woman, even especially, and one great baby boomer. Truly, how can our listeners and our viewers learn more about you, follow you? You have some great stuff out there.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, and I have 2 courses on LinkedIn Learning. One is about how to have, the difficult conversations. The other one is on cultural competence. So if you just look up, Mary Frances Winters, the Winters Group is www.wintersgroup.com, Twitter at Mary F. Winters, and LinkedIn, I believe, is Mary F. Winters too. I don't know but you can find me, Mary Frances Winters. You can find me, on all of those, and Instagram, as well. So I'm not real big on social media, only because I just think that sometimes social media can do the opposite of what it's intended to do. It can pull us apart rather than bring us together. So,
yeah.
But my messages on social media are all positive and ones that hopefully bring us together. But www.wintersgroup.com would probably be the place to start.
That is fabulous. Mary Frances, thank you so much for joining me here on Slater Success Live today. I am a huge admirer, your thought leadership, and the way you address diversity and inclusion is well needed out in the workforce. It's well needed out in the world, because it's with women like you is where true change is created. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And listeners, stay tuned. We're going to be doing some more Slater Success Live shows this August with some great upcoming guests. I have the leader shortly of a fabulous organization, so stay tuned. I was just talking to Renee the other day. She's going to be a guest in the next week and 2, with some other things coming up as well in August. Also, check out her success story, where we also do great interviews with fabulous, gutsy women and those few brilliant men out there. And there's a lot of brilliant men. I'm just teasing, guys. For those of you who want more information, always check me out at Slater Success Live. I will see you next time. Most importantly, leave a comment of your takeaway today and let us know what you're going to implement around that. See you soon.